Warning, the following program contains news talk, solutions, and information not found in filtered media outlets. Viewer discretion is advised.
Attention, you are now about to enter
Filter-Free Radio.
So open your mind, push reset, and reboot your computer.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Filter. It's time for news, opinion, and ass-kicking from Filter-Free Radio. Better than news, better than talk. Giving the finger to mainstream media. Who's got the goods? They've got the goods. It's Filter-Free Radio. FilterFreeRadio.com.
When I talk about resistance, I think we have to stand up now and carry out acts of nonviolent resistance.
Because the truth is, we do have power.
We live in revolutionary times, but the counter-revolution is winning.
Sounds like a case of the Mondays.
Live Monday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. FilterFreeRadio.com.
This is my favorite show.
We have been given an opportunity to make a new beginning.
And I think it's very important for us to start to build a culture of resistance because what we're doing isn't working, clearly.
It's our job to very coldly assess reality and then figure out how to respond.
Your number one source for unfiltered truth, analysis, and solutions. FilterFreeRadio.com.
Oh, it's a good day and it's going to be a good show. Welcome, my friends. Alternative minds, independent thinkers, unfiltered truth, and news seekers. Jacob Dean broadcasting live here from Portland, Oregon, FilterFreeRadio.com headquarters. This is our show, Filter Free Radio, our show, Fed Up with the Status Quo. We talk about how we change it. We talk about how you and I, we the people, mobilize and get active and be the change that we need. We are the ones we are waiting for, right? And if we can reach one person, just one person, and make a difference in that life, in that one person's life, that eventually will become a lifetime of difference. That is what this is all about. That is a success. And again, we are live on our website, filterfreeradio.com. We are live on radioornot.com. We are live on Liberal Justice Radio on the TuneIn app and tunein.com, also on online radio. And so much coming up in this program. We're going to talk about the money. It's all about the money. You talk about trying to save the world, no one cares. You try to talk about saving yourself, no one cares. You talk about saving a couple of bucks, and everyone listens. No, this is a show about wealth inequality. This is a show about capitalism. This is not talk radio. We are actually going to discuss the real problems and the real solutions. We're not going to pretend that we don't know what the problems are, and we're sure as hell not going to pretend that we don't know what the solutions are. And I'm so sick and tired of typical talk radio because this isn't it, and this is what we're doing. We got to do our own thing and do something different. It's Filter Free Radio. So good to be with you. We're going to talk about the money. We're going to talk about a lot of money. We're going to talk about the root causes of the problems, capitalism. We're going to talk about wealth inequality. And we want to invite you into the conversation. Always, we love your participation, and that is what it's all about. We need you to participate. Our telephone number, which you can call 24/7, anytime. You can call it right now. You can call it tomorrow. You can call it tonight. You can call it whenever. 503-746-TALK. That telephone number, 503-746-TALK. 503-746-TALK. That's 8255. And again, you can call that anytime if you're listening to us on a podcast, if you're listening to us on the free Stitcher app, on free iTunes, on free YouTube. It's all free, by the way. If you're listening to us on a recorded podcast, we also want to hear from you. 503-746-TALK. You can Skype into this show. You can use your Skype and find me, Jacob_Dean. on Skype. You can also email us, jacob@filterfreeradio.com, and skeptical@filterfreeradio.com. And, of course, find us on Twitter @filterfreeradio. And on Facebook, there's a lot of stuff happening on our Facebook page, which you always need to check out. It's facebook.com/filterfreeradio. And by my side, as always, is our super duper awesome master producer, our co-host, our kick-ass all-around brother from another mother, live from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Mr. Skeptical Scott.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, there he is, man. There he is. Love it, brother. Love it.
I just had to give you that pregnant pause to start things off.
Just to, heighten the blood pressure about 10 points, just instantaneously, like, dead air.
Oh, he's not there.
No, what happened? The magic is not working.
I'm here.
It's all good, brother. It's so good to have you with us, man. And maybe at some point tonight we can have a little fun near the end of the show. We talk a little basketball or something, because I know both of you and I are still pumped over that game last night. No one knows what I'm talking about, and I don't want to dive too much into the fluff today, but we can't talk about the Portland Trailblazers beating the Houston Rockets. This is why I'm wearing black, red, and white right now, and if you're watching this on the video stream, I just want to throw that one out there. Horrible officiating, but, we digress, right? Got to throw that one out there. Have a little fun, right? And Scott, you weren't here last week. Kenny Pick and Adam Hebert of Mic Check Radio and Turn Up the Night were guest hosts. We had a lot of fun. We didn't really get into the news, and we didn't really get into much of a serious filter-free discussion, so I want to be sure to do that tonight. And without further ado, we've got our brother from another mother on the line with us, and I want to dive into the news that this came about, and is from the Bill Moyers conversation with Paul Krugman, not necessarily an economist that we subscribe to on a regular basis or follow or play audio clips on a regular basis from. This is not, Paul Krugman is not our
an endorsement
economist.
of Paul Krugman.
Right, but what I want to share with you is essentially the revelation, which I'm sure is, already happened, far long ago. It's just now we can make it public for Paul Krugman.
Well, I mean, I think the importance of having a Paul. What we're talking about, by the way, is Paul Krugman was on Bill Moyers, on PBS, and it's important to note that anytime something breaks through to the mainstream, and Paul Krugman's mainstream, let's not kid ourselves. He's a New York Times columnist, economist. He's a
establishment status quo.
Yeah, he's part of the establishment. Yeah, right. Sure. And I believe me, I used to have a lot of respect for him. I don't so much anymore. But the point is that when someone like that, of that ilk, be it Paul Krugman or anybody in that mainstream corporate media, actually comes out and talks about things are going to get really, really, really bad, and it's in all the writings on the wall. And then he's actually essentially on the show to promote or to talk about this other guy's book, which he read and which everybody apparently who's read,
right.
Which is just blowing people's minds, and it's like, well, it doesn't. I mean, I sat there and watched.
By the way, it's called Capital in the 21st Century, and it's by a French economist, Thomas Piketty. And apparently, this thing is a revelation. I have not read it yet. I just watched an interview, and apparently, this is a big deal. So, I want to talk about it.
It is for people in the corporate media. I mean, anytime that I'm saying he breaks through to the mainstream and he apparently has done a lot of research and has all the documentation and graphs and charts and things to prove it. And essentially he's talking about wealth inequality and concentration of wealth amongst a very few wealthy, and I don't mean rich, I mean wealthy, elites. And he talks, of course, about inherited wealth and what that does to a society. And the writing's on the wall, and of course it's finally become undeniable and unable to be ignored by these mainstream economists who say, well, if only. Right. Wow.
And pretend that they don't know what the real problem is, and pretend that they don't know what the solution is.
Right. If we could just get Obama to get a jobs bill, if we could just get, none of that's going to happen, okay? Yeah. So let's just stop talking about if only and start talking about reality. And that's what this guy's done, apparently, and it's really struck a chord with these people, which I think is about time. I mean, if you've been reading or listening to Richard Wolff or David Harvey or Michael Hudson, by the way, Michael Hudson's another one of my favorite economists. You can find him on the Real News Network, therealnews.com. He does a weekly segment on there, well, along with Bill Black. But the point is that it's undeniable now in the mainstream, the consolidation of wealth, the disparity of wealth, the increase exponentially in the consolidation and disparity of wealth, and where we're headed. And these guys are like, wow, it's far worse than we thought, and it's going to get worse. Yeah. And he basically says oligarchy. He uses the term fascism and oligarchy, which is remarkable coming from Paul Krugman, right?
Exactly, coming from the establishment, the status quo, now saying, we are approaching oligarchy. We have plutocrats, and capitalism is the crisis. We have a problem here, and the reason why I want to share these clips with you, regular listeners of Filter Free Radio, folks who have been following Skeptical Scott and I since our inception 2.5 years ago. And by the way, you can watch all of our past shows at filterfreeradio.com for free. Folks who've followed us already know that we are into the Richard Wolffs and the Michael Hudsons and the David Harveys. We're talking about how capitalism is the crisis, is the problem. We're talking about, we had that documentary, for example, Scott, on your blog at filterfreeradio.com, we had the documentary Park Avenue on our front page for like 3 months so folks could see it.
That got a lot of hits, by the way.
It got a lot of hits, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that just talks about one building on Park Avenue where the largest concentration of wealthy individuals live, and the Koch brothers and these guys who work on Wall Street live. And it's just remarkable that there's billionaires living in these luxury apartments in one building. And by the way, it's the exact same building the robber barons lived in the Roaring '20s, during the Industrial Revolution and things. It's fascinating. But anyway,
surely you can't be serious.
But
the parallel of the Gilded Age then and today's new Gilded Age is apt. It's exactly where we are. We're in a new Gilded Age.
It's
Absolutely.
Scary. And I mean, I'm only 26 years old. I can remember back in 7th grade-ish trying to learn about the medieval times, right? And how life was back then. Everyone worked for the king. You can't go out into the king's woods. You can't do anything of the king's unless you got the king's permission, and your life expectancy, like if you make it to 30, you're doing great.
Yeah, man, masters and serfs.
And how soon we forgot about that, and how scary we're approaching to become that again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but when you have dynasty wealth like the Walmart heirs, and their wealth will be passed on, through their lineage to the next Walmart heir, and that dynasty wealth grows at a faster rate than the economy grows, and you and I busting our ass, if we make $30,000, $40,000 a year, I mean, we're great. We have the conversation. What if I had $100,000? Like, I don't know how I could ever spend $1 million. How can people ration out spending millions and millions of dollars? And I shattered that paradigm last week, actually on Friday, having beers with a good friend of mine Friday night. And I'm like, duh, they're just buying power. That's how you spend billions and billions and billions of dollars. And this is why they need more and more and more money, because they want more power. They want to buy.
Well, needs the wrong word, but yeah. It's,
right.
When you have that much money and you have everything, when you have all the material wealth you could ever imagine and beyond,
right,
and you start doing just insane things to your mansions, like putting 24-karat gold on your ceiling, that kind of ridiculous stuff.
Right.
You get to the point where you want power. Right. Especially what's wrong with inherited wealth is these people have never worked a day in their life.
Yes.
Nothing of any real consequence. And what they do is, the only thing they can do with all their money is buy power and buy elected officials and eventually buy their way into office. I mean, Michael Bloomberg is a very good example of this.
Yeah.
Just for one, and of course Mitt Romney and the others.
Billionaire. Ching.
Yeah, billionaires who run our country and run our society and make the laws and these things.
And those are just the billionaires who were dumb enough to try to run for office. Those
are just ones we know about. I mean,
exactly.
Even Sheldon Adelson. I mean, Sheldon Adelson's now going to bankroll the next, regressive GOP candidate. I mean, it's.
And so this is, and then I'm talking with a good friend of mine, and we're saying, how do you spend $1 billion? And I'm like, well, you buy up a newspaper like the Washington Post, or you buy up, 800 radio stations across the United States like Clear Channel, or you buy, and you begin to control all of the politicians and all of the, judges. You got the judges in the back pockets. You got the politicians. You own them, right? They own us, right? And then it starts to break down. Like, well, then you start to see things differently, and the paradigm shifts, It doesn't become a conspiracy when you have to work 3 part-time jobs to exist, and then you literally do not have the ability to fight in the struggle nonviolently, go protest and demonstrate for the cause. You don't have the time, you don't have the money, you're living paycheck to paycheck. Like I said, you got 3 part-time jobs, you can barely exist, right? And how can you at that point, if I take tomorrow off, I can't eat next week, so how can I go to the protest? And it's like, my friend's like, it's a conspiracy. I'm like, it's not a conspiracy. It's so obvious that this is the root problems of capitalism.
It's the nature of the beast. I mean,
Yes.
that's, again, it's so simple to understand. It's the reason they invented the game Monopoly. You play the game Monopoly, you play it to its fruition. If you play with 4 people, one person ends up with all the money and the game's over. What's that ratio? It's a 25% ratio. Well, we have even more concentrated ratio than just 1 of 4. It's more like 1 of 1,000.
Right.
Or actually, that's not even the right ratio. I'm not even sure what the ratio would be, but it's exponentially higher. And the point is that that's the game. That's the way capitalism works. The game is to accumulate as much money as possible at the expense of everybody else until it's over. And this time, when the game is over, the entire planet will go down with us. Or actually, the planet will still be here. The human species will just be extinct. And let's face it, all species go extinct,
Right.
and we are no exception.
Right.
It's really important to remember that there's something like 10,000 species go extinct every day or something like that. Of course, we don't know what most of them are because they're, we're talking about bacteria and things and all these little small organisms that live like in the jungles and whatnot, or in the woods that we don't know about. And if we do know about them, you and I certainly don't know about them.
Right.
And the point is that we're not exceptional. We're just another animal on the planet, and the planet will soon expel us.
I'm so happy you said that, Scott, because in the second hour, at some point in this program, we're going to broaden, and I'm going to talk about, because last week it was Easter Sunday. Of course, it was 420, but also that day, if you happen to know, is the anniversary, tragically, of the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. We played a little pre-show music about that. And I want to talk about how the health of the real world is primary, more important than any social or economic system, because all social or economic systems are dependent upon a living planet. And we're going to talk about a new declaration. Isn't it time for a new declaration? And I would love for you to participate in the conversation. What would you add to the new declaration? 503-746-TALK. We'll talk about that in the second hour. All right, I've got a couple of clips. Well, let's play a couple of these clips before we go to the break at the bottom of the hour. This is, as we previewed, from Bill Moyers, the last great surviving thing left on free broadcast television. I'm telling you, man, I don't have cable. And
That's pretty much it. That and maybe Frontline.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, there's very few exceptions. You count them on one hand. And this is a conversation, Bill Moyers and Paul Krugman. Paul Krugman, an economist, essentially what I would consider an establishment status quo economist, and talking about this new book, Capital in the 21st Century, by French economist Thomas Piketty. It's a revelation, and we're talking about his term, patrimony capitalism. Listen to this.
Actually, a lot of what we know about inequality actually comes from him, because he's been an invisible presence behind a lot. So when you talk about the 1%, you're actually, to a large extent, reflecting his prior work. But what he's really done now is he said, even those of you who talk about the 1%, you don't really get what's going on. You're living in the past. You're living in the 80s. You think that Gordon Gekko is the future. And Gordon Gekko is a bad guy. He's a predator, but he's a self-made predator. And right now what we're really talking about is we're talking about Gordon Gekko's son or daughter. We're talking about inherited wealth playing an ever-growing role. So he's telling us that we are on the road not just to a highly unequal society, but to a society of an oligarchy, a society of inherited wealth, patrimonial capitalism. And he does it with enormous amount of documentation, and it's a revelation. I mean, even for someone like me, it's a revelation.
Even for someone like me, it's a revelation. Well, amen, Paul Krugman. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, right. Because Paul Krugman's read Marx's Das Kapital and the Grundrisse, and yeah, right. I mean, it's all this guy has done is brought, I guess, Marx's critique of capitalism into the mainstream. Mm-hmm. And it's not entirely Marx, of course. There's a lot of other people out there who are able to critique capitalism for its failures and shortcomings. And of course, the biggest shortcoming is the fundamental dichotomy of capitalism is the wealth accumulation, which ends up being concentration, et cetera. So it's really just it's the nature of the beast. And the most difficult thing to grasp after I watched that interview and I was thinking about alternative mechanisms of supplying needs for people, and because everything is a commodity these days. We live in a society where everything has a price tag, including our own lives, including our health care, including you name it.
Yeah.
There's a price tag on it. And so how do you take the price tag off of things and make it intrinsically valuable such that as a society we are able to provide it for ourselves and for those who cannot afford these things, i.e. I'm speaking, of course, of full employment, jobs, health care, housing, food, all the basic essentials you need to survive and live a decent, humane, moral life without having to beg, borrow, or steal or suffer uncontrollably because you have no means to provide for yourself or your family.
Have a little dignity. Something
yeah,
like
I'm talking, of course, about socialism.
Yeah.
And that's such a dirty word to these people. But
you said the S word.
Yeah, well, Jesus was a socialist, right? It's about the greater good.
Amen.
It's about what is right, what is moral. Yeah, and I'm not religious by any stretch, but the point is that it's about what's moral, what's right, and what living around people and stepping over the homeless and these things, and it's disgusting. You dehumanize other people, and you think, well, it'll never happen to me. Well, what this guy is basically saying is that it will happen to you. It's inevitable. Yeah, it's inevitable. Those of us who sit around and think this won't happen to me are wrong.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off. I want to squeeze this clip in because this is a perfect segue. This is the next clip, Paul Krugman explaining how this will affect us. He literally explains the patrimony capitalism, how the dynastic wealth will develop, how you and I will continue to remain poor. The poor will get poor, the rich will get richer, and this is exactly explained out by an economist who sort of knows what he's talking about. I'm no economist. I play a truth teller on the internet. So, but this is a pretty good job in 60 seconds of explaining to you and I don't understand, I used to do pre-calculus and calculus in high school, but that was so long ago. That's foreign language to me now. But this is a great clip. Paul Krugman on Bill Moyers, Moyers and Company, BillMoyers.com, the last great thing on PBS. Talking about the new book, Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty, Patrimony Capitalism. This is how dynastic wealth grows. This is how the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And think of the Walmart heirs when you hear this.
What that means is that if you have a large fortune, suppose that our family has a large fortune.
Walmart.
The inheritors of that large fortune can live very, very well. They can live extraordinary standard of living and still put a large fraction of the income from that fortune aside, and the fortune will grow faster than the economy. So the big dynastic fortunes tend to take an ever-growing share of total national wealth. So when you have a situation where the returns on capital are pretty high and the growth rate of the economy is not that high, you have a situation in which not only can people live well off inherited wealth, but they can actually pass on to the next generation even more, an even higher share. And so it's all, in his terms, R, the rate of return on capital, and G, the rate of growth of the economy. And when you have a high R, low G economy, which is what we now have, then you're talking about a situation in which dynasties come increasingly to dominate the top of the economic spectrum. And a tiny fraction of the population ends up very dominant.
Friends, today's vocabulary word is plutocracy.
You got it, baby. A rule of the many by the few.
Look up the word plutocracy or plutocrat or oligarchy or oligarch, and just start there. That's good. That's a great place to start. And shift the paradigm from if I just work really hard and pull myself up from my bootstraps, I might exist, not be homeless, right? But there's a reason why the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, right?
Well, the most astounding, and this, Paul Krugman, of course, hits on this, is that it's unfathomable to you and I. And if you had that Chris Rock clip ready, I should have mentioned to you earlier, it'd be great, because it's where he basically says that, I'm not talking about rich, I'm talking about wealth. Rich is something you lose in a weekend with a bad drug habit and a gambling problem. but wealth, that's something that stays with you and you pass on to your kids. Right. It's like Shaquille O'Neal is rich. The guy who writes his paycheck is wealthy.
Exactly.
I'm not talking about celebrities or athletes. I'm talking about the guys, people who own them. Those people are wealthy, and they own the rest of us as a result.
Bingo.
It's unfathomable. Millions and hundreds of millions don't even equate because we're talking about thousands of millions, tens of thousands of millions.
Right.
In the case of the Waltonaires, they each own $15,000 million. Well, if you talk about 15,000 million, and let's say you spend $100 million on a political candidate, that's nothing to you.
Yep.
$100 million to buy an election? I mean, that's nothing, but it's a lot of money in an election cycle, and hey, guess what? Now you have the power.
And
that's how these things work.
And if Scott and I had $100 million, we'd change the fucking world. You know what I'm saying? So
start a revolution.
We'd do something. And for the common good, right? For the moral obligation to the future generations.
Yeah, we'd definitely start something. Start feeding the masses, you know?
Yeah, there you go. We'd start the food bus. I would build the logistics on which the alternative systems can be created that we are seeking.
You create an alternative, return to agrarian society where people have everything they need and want within self-sufficient communities and don't need the corporate state.
Amen. I want to play one more clip. This is the last clip of Paul Krugman. We'll play before the break, and when we come back from the break, I want to play clips from economists just to juxtapose here. And this comes from a conversation that Scott and I talked about several months ago, if not a year or two ago, from the Charlie Rose show of all places, another PBS program. Theme here: shut out the poison of the corporate media. But PBS is my alternative, given I only have free broadcast television, right? So time to build that nonprofit community television station, X-Ray FM, Portland, just saying. And we're going to play clips from Richard Wolff and David Harvey from a conversation a while back on the Charlie Rose show, talking about capitalism, talking about how come no one talks about capitalism is the problem. And we'll get into all of that. But last clip from Paul Krugman. I wanted to share this with you. This caught my attention over the weekend on Bill Moyers, Bill Moyers and Company, BillMoyers.com. Love Bill Moyers. He's the best. Paul Krugman.
There's a direct impact, which is that part of income is always going to go to labor, although that seems to be a diminishing fraction. But the part that comes from capital is going to be in the hands of a very few people. The other thing, which I think is critically important, and he talks about more towards the end of the book, is the political economy. That when you have what Teddy Roosevelt could have told you and did, that when you have a few people who are so wealthy that they can effectively buy the political system is going to tend to serve their interests.
Bingo.
And that is going to reinforce this shift of income and wealth towards the top.
Bingo.
Do you agree with him that we are drifting toward oligarchy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't think that's even, I don't see that there's any question of it.
There you go. There's the money clip right there.
You gotta love hearing that from someone like Paul Krugman. He's like, oh, yeah. You're like, what?
Here,
I would even say we're already there, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. One more time for our friends who didn't catch that last one. This is a keeper.
Do you agree with him that we are drifting toward oligarchy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't think that's even, I don't see that there's any question of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's duh. No duh, right?
Yeah, I think that's great. But
well, Paul Krugman,
still, it's a revelation he just had.
Well, Paul Krugman, if it's a no duh, how come you haven't been saying that for the last 5 years? Oh, I went there. Okay, I'll tell you what. On that note,
the good news is it's bad enough that he's talking about it. So
there we go.
Well, we've been saying for a while things have to get worse before they get better. So,
and at least we can start the conversation here, and the conversation will continue. We'll take a short break here at the bottom of the hour. More filter-free radio. Jacob Dean, Skeptical Scott, radical truth-telling. Filterfreeradio.com. We will be right back.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott, now streaming every Sunday, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern at weactradio.com.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio. Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean. With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I keep going back to this sports analogy, and I know that a lot of people aren't into the sports thing, and I get that. But, if you got a team going up against another team, let's call them Team Democrats and Team Republicans, and let's say they play the same game over and over and over again for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. and they keep running the same play over and over again. Like the Democrats keep running the same play, the same exact play over and over again. Eventually, the other team's going to figure out, wait a minute, they're going to run that same play again, so we'll anticipate that, prepare for that, and make sure that doesn't happen.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
And so trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions causes more problems.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
Did you scramble to get your taxes done this year, dashing to the mailbox at the last minute? Yeah, me too. I really don't mind paying what I owe, but I hate having to pay the taxes owed by the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase, Mitt Romney, Exxon, and Amazon. They're just a few of the astonishingly profitable corporations and super-rich financial hucksters who walk their tax tabs each year, thus putting the cost of everything from the military to our national parks onto our shoulders. We constantly hear CEOs and their congressional hirelings wail about the punishing tax rate of 35% assessed on corporate profits. But they're grinning as they're crying, for they know they actually pay nowhere near that. In fact, the latest assessment by the Government Accountability Office found that U.S. corporations pay an average tax rate of only 12.6%, forcing workaday taxpayers to cover the multiple billions of dollars that these privileged elites dodge. How do they do that? Simple. They duck through ridiculous loopholes in our tax laws. How ridiculous? Try the subsidy for corporate criminals. If you get a speeding ticket, do you get to deduct the fine from the income tax you owe? Ha, just try it. But J.P. Morgan Chase was fined more than $20 billion last year for major frauds and consumer rip-offs, and his honchos have now deducted that punishment from the corporate tax bill, claiming it as a cost of doing business. Oh, they also get to deduct the many millions of dollars they paid lawyers to defend their blatant wrongdoing. This is Jim Hightower saying, well, sniff the elites, we're merely making rightful use of the deductions allowed by tax laws. But it's their lawyers who wrote those laws to legalize their thievery. And need I mention that they also get a deduction for the mega salaries and expenses of those lawyers? So we pay for their wrongdoings, their fines, and their lawyers.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Hi, friends. This is Tom Hartman.
This is Stephanie Miller.
Hey, this is Hal Sparks.
I'm Brad Friedman. I approve of Nicole Sandler's RadioOrNot.com.
Radio or Not.
Radio or Not.
RadioOrNot.com.
RadioOrNot.com.
RadioOrNot.com. RadioOrNot.com.
Hey friends, Jacob Dean here with exciting news. You can now hear my show, Filter Free Radio, on the free Stitcher mobile app. Just visit our website, filterfreeradio.com, scroll down on the left-hand side, and click on the Stitcher logo to hear us on Stitcher. That's all there is to it. No syncing, no taking up memory on your device. Just Filter Free Radio on demand for you on the go. Plus, you can rate and review Filter Free Radio on Stitcher. The more you rate, review, and share us, the higher we will rank on Stitcher, and that means the more people will discover Filter Free Radio. It's never been easier to enjoy Filter Free Radio and help us spread the word. Visit our website, filterfreeradio.com, and click on the Stitcher logo to hear us on Stitcher. Unfiltered radical truth-telling, anytime, anywhere. Thanks, and keep up the good fight.
This is Liberal Justice Radio.
The whole world becomes clear to you, like an open book.
Liberal Justice Radio.
Live 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. FilterFreeRadio.com.
I don't need you. I got money.
If you're not rich, blame yourself.
Oh boy, I'm rich.
Well, for once, the rich white man is in control.
I quit my job. We're rich now. I don't need to be working.
When I get my hands on that money.
You know, rich people are just poor people with money. What's the difference? Rich people are just poor people with money.
The rich are different. Because when you have that much money, then human beings become disposable. Even friends and family become disposable and are replaced. And when the rich take absolute power, then the citizens become disposable, which is in essence what's happened.
Ain't it? Welcome back to the show, broadcasting live, filterfreeradio.com, radioornot.com. We're live on Liberal Justice Radio. We are also carried on the fine community radio station, the voice of Washington, D.C., We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com. However, you are listening to us, so good to be with you, so good to have you with us. And, you know, not your typical talk radio. We don't pretend to ignore we don't pretend we don't know what the problems are, and we definitely aren't trying to pretend that we don't know what the solutions are. Granted, I don't know what all the solutions are. At least I don't know what all of the answers are either, but at least we're trying to ask the right questions. And I think the question needs to start with capitalism. For our friends here in Portland, Oregon, where I'm broadcasting live from, I want to mention coming up this Thursday, April 24th at 6:30 p.m. Portland time, Pacific time, the Seattle City Councilwoman Shama Savant will be speaking in Portland at 1624 Northeast Hancock Street, Portland, Oregon, 97212. That's Thursday, April 24th, 6:30 p.m. Shama Savant, the Seattle Socialist City Councilwoman and $15 Now activist, will be speaking on the issue of raising the minimum wage to the living wage, which is the new talking point, right? Run with that one, right? Raise the minimum wage to a living wage. That's a good start. Also speaking, there will be Portland City Council candidate Nicholas Caleb and other folks. And folks in Portland should check out 15nowpdx.org, which is a really cool website, and they are starting the Living Wage Wednesdays. Here in Portland at City Hall, Wednesdays is now Living Wage Wednesdays. Kind of going along with the Moral Mondays in, North Carolina. Living Wage Wednesdays, you need to check out the website, 15nowpdx.org. And, we got to ask ourselves, this is also part of the conversation. Why is it that our wages, the worker bees, you and I, the workers at the bottom, why is it that our wages have remained stagnant and flat? And if you adjust for inflation, our wages have decreased over the last 40, 50 years. Meanwhile, our productivity skyrockets and the corporate CEO profit skyrockets and all that money flows to the top. Meanwhile, you and I can't even get a job to exist. I can't live on $9 an hour. And that's the minimum wage in Oregon State. The federal is still, 7 something? 8 something?
7 1/4. I think it went up to, didn't it go up to 9 federally?
And it's like,
I don't even know. It's not enough.
Obama, well, he's going to raise it to 10-10. Remember, it's easy to remember, 10-10. First of all, if you can get that,
2016.
If you can get that done, okay, but it doesn't go far enough. And if you look at the rest of the developed world, there's a reason why in Australia, for example, the minimum wage is $17 an hour, $16 an hour. Europe, $18 an hour.
Yeah, there was an article the other day I saw that, not Sweden, what's the other one? Switzerland. Switzerland was set to pass the largest minimum wage bill in the world. And that means that all their citizens would be making at least, I want to say it was close to $20 an hour. And I thought, good for those people. Of course, the irony about that is that even if they're making $20 an hour, they still don't pay for health care. Right. We still pay for health care. They don't pay for upper education. I mean, they're guaranteed an education through college and university. As long as you want to go to school or trade school,
right?
The government will pay for it. It's part of your tax dollars because they understand the 7-fold return on investment that citizens provide the society when they get a higher education or some sort of skill training and then become a tradesman. And yet, what are we doing? We're building indentured servants who go $100,000 in debt to learn a skill or get a college degree, and then they're unemployed.
Yeah,
it's like,
and if
it's suicide.
Yeah. Great segue. And then I love you, man. It is. You're right. You're absolutely right. And if you're like me and like Jim Hightower, we heard on the break, that, we just did our taxes recently, you probably have an idea of how much money you made this year. And there's a really cool calculator that we shared on our Facebook page, facebook.com/filterfreeradio. I found it from Occupy Wall Street. There's a really cool calculator. And what you can do is you can go to our Facebook page and scroll down a little bit. It's the second story, or it's up near the top. And it says, enter how much money you made this year into this calculator. And then the calculator will tell you how much money that should be had the workers' wages stayed up with productivity and inflation for the last 40 years. Now, like we're just talking about, the minimum wage should be around $20 an hour, and everyone who makes 15 or $20 an hour raises a fit. Oh, how they I need to be making more than them. We need to raise up the whole bottom. Okay, if you make $20 an hour now, and everyone gets a $10 raise, then you should also get that. I'm not trying to cut you out. I'm trying to lift up that safety net just above, existence.
Well, it's important to remember that the minimum wage in constant dollars since 1968, and the reason people picked 1968 was because that was the year the minimum wage was up with inflation. It was consistent with inflation, so it was at par, and now we're far below par at this point. The minimum wage in constant dollars since 1968, if it had kept up with inflation, would be $21.15 an hour.
There you go.
Think about it. But that's $42,000 a year as a minimum wage.
But thanks to the greed of the corporate state and capitalism, workers' wages, if you adjust for inflation, have decreased over 40 years, and we know that. And the productivity is skyrocketing, the profits are flowing to the top, and it is time for us to end the radical wealth inequality with radical nonviolent civil disobedience. It is time to organize strikes and boycotts and sit-ins and all of the above at whatever the cost to give ourselves and our future a chance. And we talked about that. Most people can't afford to take a week off to go protest, living paycheck to paycheck and making sub-living wages. And the system is rigged this way on purpose. So
that reminds me. Did you see the article from Desmond Tutu last week that he wrote? He wrote an article. I'm surprised. I forgot to mention this to you. He wrote an article calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
Yes, I did see that.
Yeah, of the fossil fuel industry.
Yes.
And he said we need an apartheid-style boycott of the fossil fuel industry in order for us to save the planet. Exactly. It was a really good article.
So if you are interested, you can go to our Facebook page and find the calculator there and find out how much, enter how much money you made, and then the calculator will tell you, how much money that should have been. And by the way, I did the math just for easy numbers. Let's say you made minimum wage, and that's around $15,000 a year, right? If you made $15,000 a year and you adjusted that for inflation over the last 40 years, that should be $20,492. So that's over $5,000 that your corporate CEO that you work for stole from you in the last 40 years, and that's just this year. And for the folks who make a little bit more than that, let's say you make $40,000 a year. I did the math. If you make $40,000 a year, it should have been over $50,000. So you can find that calculator there and find out how much the corporate state and capitalism is screwing you for. So on that note, we've got about 15 minutes before the next one.
It's our money, too. It's the important thing to remember. It's our money. It's not like the big lie is that you're taking from people who've earned this money. They should keep the money they earned. That's such a lie. Right. I mean, first of all, if someone gets rich because somebody else is made poor, they're very well. I mean, the workers are the ones who create productivity, who are productive, who create wealth through their labor. And the problem now is that's the whole reason that wage labor is just a step above wage slavery, or just a step above slavery. I mean, wage labor is wage slavery because what you're doing is you're giving people a pittance for their labor while you really reap all the rewards. And that's the nature of capitalism, which is the nature of our society, which is why we have this wealth accumulation at the expense of others.
And people will ask, what's the solution? Well, the solution is, we'll talk about that in just a second.
Workers should own workers should own their own. Workers should own the profits. In other words, it's shared profits. In other words, workers should own their own businesses. If you work at a business, you should be part owner. Yep. Because you're the one who's manufacturing or producing or pushing papers or whatever, making that company go. And you should, workers should own the fruits of their labors. In other words, workers should own the profits that they create, not just an hourly wage for it.
And that is not something that, is like fantasy. That exists. Those models exist in reality today, and they work. They work just fine. Matter of fact, they work better than what's kind of going on here. And I want to play a couple of clips from Richard Wolff and David Harvey, economists who Skeptical Scott and I subscribe to. Not necessarily the Paul Krugmans of the world. These guys are outside of the establishment status quo. And the first clip is Richard Wolff talking about how it's taboo to talk about this, right? Here is a clip from Charlie Rose a long time ago, Richard Wolff.
Well, I think that what's coming to an end, to start with the good news, is a 50-year taboo in the United States about questioning our economic system. I mean, we take pride as Americans that we question and debate our education system, our transportation system. For the last couple of years, we have been debating our medical insurance and medical care system. But for 50 years at least, when it comes to the capitalist system, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, cheerleading is the substitute for serious question, for serious debate.
Cheerleading. Kind of sounds like MSNBC, don't it, a little bit? And then
or Fox.
And that comes from once you've been on the inside of the machine a little bit, which I have, used to work for the #1 progressive national talk radio show in the country for a few years, got to see a little bit behind the scenes of what's going on. One of the things I've learned from being inside of that machine is the easiest way for the MSNBCs of the world and the Fox Newses of the world to continue to perpetuate the problem and maintain their empires and maintain their job security is to pretend that they don't know what the solutions to the problems are. And they distract us with fluff here and he said, she said there, and pay no attention to what's really fucking you behind the curtain. You know what I'm saying? So I'm dropping F-bombs tonight. I'm angry.
You write that down, man.
And it's okay. We'll edit.
47-minute mark.
Love you, bro. Thank you. And we have not challenged capitalism, and this reality is what we have to show for it, friends. And if you are scraping along, can't exist, if you feel me in the last 45 minutes of the show, you're like, yeah, man, I'm with you. I can't afford to take a day off to go protest because I'm living paycheck to paycheck because I don't even make a living wage because capitalism sucks. The solution is you and I have to get active and make the changes happen. That is the solution. And it begins by challenging capitalism, which we have not been allowed to do. And here is Richard Wolff talking about that.
Remember, we haven't had a broad-based movement in this country fundamentally questioning capitalism in a long time.
Why not?
Well, I think society was successful in creating that taboo, in making the question of criticizing capitalism either a sign that you weren't well educated or that you didn't understand how things worked, or worst of all, that you were somehow disloyal to the United States by raising questions about its system. And that was done, and a culture was developed in which it became very difficult, very dangerous personally, to your career, to even your functioning as a citizen, to do that kind of questioning. And breaking that up, that taboo, opening the space for debate, is probably the long-term historical debt we owe to the Occupy movement for having taken us a quantum leap forward.
Woo! Yes, that's what I'm talking about. If you want to boil down the success of the Occupy movement to one thing, it is raising the awareness of wealth inequality. Bingo. And
in the mainstream anyway, yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm someone out there who is I've been fighting this stuff for 30 years. And I'm with you, man. Keep up the struggle. Hang in there. I'm with you. But here's a clip from David Harvey, another economist, also a part of this conversation that happened on the Charlie Rose Show a while back. And we covered this on one of our economic shows, Economic Solutions, I believe. You can watch all of our past shows for free at our website at filterfreeradio.com. And David Harvey, again, the Occupy movement really showed us what's going on here. And we got to talk about that. And we've got to talk about where the heck we can get together to talk about it. Come to find out, these private, for-profit, corporations and capitalists own everything. Not only do they own all the politicians and all the judges, and they got all of them in their back pocket, not only do they own and control all of the media that you and I, hear, so they control everything, all the information that we get, but they also own all of the important places, all the important land. And a really wise person once told me, buy up land because I ain't making no more of it, right? So here's David Harvey in this conversation.
I mean, one of the things Occupy did was to point out the power of Wall Street over politics, the power of Wall Street over the media. And I like to think there's a party of Wall Street which is deeply implanted both in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party.
Bingo.
So I think one of the things that Occupy did was to say, how can you have a debate when the power structures are stuck in such a way that there's no space for a debate? And that even came down to a physical space. What struck me about the Occupy Wall Street, where are the public spaces in which the public can assemble and discuss these things?
Right.
And you had to go to private spaces like Zuccotti Park. In London, they wanted to go to Paternoster Square, and they found that Paternoster Square was in private ownership, so they had to go to the steps of St. Paul's. And you kind of realize there are no public spaces in the city where you can assemble and have a discussion about these things. And so when they started to have assemblies in these spaces, then you start to get police power saying you can't do this, you can't do this, and you can't do that. So I think the Occupy Wall Street problematized all sorts of things about the power relation, who controls the city, who controls the public spaces in the city. My joke about this is increasingly what you have is a policy towards public space, which is to turn it into places where there's okay for an assembly of tulips, but not of people. Okay.
Yes.
And so
It's okay.
actually,
Yes,
so
right. Okay to grow things and look pretty.
And all the tulips there are going, nodding their heads and looking very nice, and you kind of go, well, if you want to have an assembly of people, the police come and tell you can't be here. And at some point or other, you've got to say, we have to open up spaces in the city where we can have these discussions, because we can't have it in the media.
Nope. And it's happening right now. Matter of fact, this week, wave of action is happening everywhere, especially in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Check out waveofaction.org and hashtag waveofaction. People are getting active about all sorts of things. There, Mark Taylor Canfield in the chat room. What's up, Mark? Is posting links about the Seattle Earth Day park occupation. I mean, and by all means, I'm all for whatever your cause is, whatever your passion is, get out there and fight for it. I'm sure we don't agree on a lot of things. I'm not a communist, by the way. I'm sure we don't agree on everything. This is the beauty of being unique people. We are all different, and we have different passions and different love and all sorts of things. And follow that, man. Like, if you are passionate about the environment, that's what you should be getting active in. Or if you
I think we should all be passionate about the environment at this point.
Well, we're going to explain that in the next hour. Absolutely.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm with you.
That's part of the problem in our society as it is, where people are passionate about dead-end things, cars and material possessions, and
not dealing in the concrete.
Yeah, abstract distractions rather than things that improve society and things that improve their own lives. I mean, how does being passionate about a sports team improve the quality of your life?
Don't hate on the Trailblazers.
I wasn't speaking of you, of course.
I wasn't talking about you wearing that red tie for the Portland Trailblazers.
I actually saw there's a good article on Common Dreams and a good picture, really a priceless picture on Common Dreams about the protest of the Native Americans at the Cleveland Indians baseball stadium.
Right.
For their racism, and there's just a photograph of some white guy in face paint. I mean, some guy who painted his face to go to a baseball game, dressed, as an Indian chief or whatever the mascot is, arguing with an actual Native American who's standing there stone-faced. And the picture of the two juxtaposition between these two people is all you need to know about why it's racist as hell to have a human being as a mascot for a sports team. It's not about whether or not it's a racial, whether it's a negative term, whether redskin is a bad word, or it's about dehumanizing people and making them mascots.
The other.
The other. And of course, let's face it, we committed genocide with the Native Americans to the point where we can just make them our mascots for sports franchises.
Yeah.
But the point is that the fanaticism that these people have and the energy and time that they spend on events like going to a sporting event, painting your face and getting all wound up about it, buying jerseys and spending money, drinking, of course, is if that amount of energy, as you said before, is put towards protests, general strikes, getting active and educating the population about what's wrong with our society and how to fix it, God, how much better would it be? I mean, you can get 50,000 people to show up to a football game on Sunday, but you can't get 100 people to show up to a protest on the mall.
Right? You can get 2 million people to show up to the Super Bowl celebration, but you can't get 12 people to show up to a conversation about how the hell we're going to change the world and move forward.
We're going to save the planet from total annihilation.
So, I mean, I'm with you, brother.
Yeah, it's like that. But that's what I'm saying. That's where we are in the world, not just our society. I mean, let's face it, Europe, those guys go nuts for soccer. They're just as bad as we are in terms of deluding themselves from reality. I mean, every Western civilization is. But the point is that something has to start. And the most dangerous thing about telling the truth is, and by the way, this references Chris Hedges' article today. His article today is called "The Rhetoric of Violence." And he says that basically our weapon is not violence. Their weapon is violence. Our weapon has to be the truth. And some of us will be killed for telling the truth because, as George Orwell has most famously said, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Yeah. And that's where we are. And that's what revolutions are founded on. Revolutions are started by truth-telling, by exposing the delusions that people are living under to the point where they can no longer accept it, and then they resist, and resistance is coming. I mean, let's face it, America's a tinderbox. People are being oppressed, and more so. I mean, go to West Virginia for crying out loud, or Camden, New Jersey, or anywhere in the Midwest where this old Rust Belt has just all been just vacated. I mean, there's some really as a side note, as a tangent, there's just like really neat pictures on weatherchannel.com today of abandoned malls. In Akron, Ohio. There's 2 malls in Akron, Ohio. Like one of them was the largest mall in the world when it was built in 1977, and now it's abandoned. And the photographs are about to be torn down. And the photographs are just like, it's haunting, Like this is something that people used to do every weekend and would go shopping or whatever, and now it's going to be demolished. And that's just indicative of where we are as a society.
Yeah, capitalism will fail us. In the end, it will crumble. And so what is the solution? We talked this hour about the economy, capitalism, wealth inequality. What is the solution? There are lots of solutions, and there are lots of examples.
First hour problems, second hour solutions.
Our solutions. And here is a clip, one of the last clips I want to play, of Richard Wolff on talking about what are some of the alternatives.
Well, you have efforts like this. One is the cooperative, one is the community enterprise, one is the collective enterprise. But the example that most these days is brought to the fore is a enterprise in the north of Spain called Mondragon, based in a little village or town in the north of Spain called Mondragon. A Catholic priest in that part of Spain got together a handful of workers in the mid-1950s and said, because the unemployment is here so terrible, because the government doesn't care about most working people without work, let's start by building cooperatives, groups. Here we are, 50-odd years later. They have 85,000 member workers in the Mondragon Corporation who work in cooperative enterprises, a whole range of them, from high-tech to low-tech, agriculture to industry, stunningly successful, a rate of growth that would be the envy of anyone. They're the largest corporation in northern Spain now, and they're one of the 10 largest corporations in Spain as a whole, which is no mean feat because Spain is an important country. So here's an example where competing with capitalists, they have organized differently. In each enterprise, the workers collectively meet and make the decision who to hire as the boss, what to pay him, what to do. It's a radical alternative. And it should be debated.
It is a radical alternative, but it also is the solution. And this is going to run us right up to the end of
It's not anti-capitalistic. They're capitalists. They're making money. The difference is the workers own their own productivity, not a small percentage of workers.
I try to save the best for last, and this is a very important clip because I didn't go to Stanford. I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Yale. I didn't do all that. I went to community college, so I don't know what happens in these Ivy League, economy worlds, right? But Richard Wolff does, and he talks about how that taboo, how you and I can never talk about capitalism being the problem, right? he talks about the solutions here are not allowed to be discussed, and not even in the universities, for example. This is very important. I'm going to share this with you.
This comes back to the question of who controls the conversation
David
about
Harvey.
what might be possible. And to the degree that all, everything is now filtered through this tremendous kind of monopoly power in the media, we're finding even in universities, we can't have a conversation about many of these things inside of universities anymore because there's a kind of orthodoxy which is taught, in economics departments and all the rest of it. So you can't have this conversation. But when something happens...
You cannot have this conversation in a university?
No, it's very hard to have this conversation.
Well, who says no?
The faculty and the whole spirit and the whole culture of the place.
Can you study Karl Marx at universities
That
in
was
America?
my point. No, I was never assigned one word of the mature Marx's economic critique, which is encapsulated in 3 volumes of Capital. Not at Harvard, not at Stanford, and not at Yale.
Not assigned. Suppose you wanted to write whatever, a thesis, a dissertation on the ideas of Karl Marx. Would somebody say that's unacceptable?
Absolutely.
At Harvard, Yale, and Stanford.
Absolutely, because that happened to me. I went at Yale, which is where I got my PhD in economics. I went to them and I proposed that I wanted to do a dissertation on the colonial economic system as it pertained in East Africa, the British in a country now called Kenya, used to be called the East Africa Protectorate.
Right.
I went to them and I said that, and they said to me, colonialism and the Marxist approach are not appropriate titles for a dissertation. My professors were not worried that they would be arrested or intimidated. No, it's more subtle. It's the consensus of the profession is that you don't do that. That's why we weren't assigned the work to read. That's why it wasn't discussed in the classroom. That's why we had to do it entirely on our own. It's just, that's why I use the word taboo. It's something that appropriately trained, well-schooled professors and graduate students don't deal with.
And there you have it. On that note, it is time for us to run to our break here at the top of the hour. We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy. When we come back, more Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean, Skeptical Scott, filterfreeradio.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott every Sunday from 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. We Act Radio, 1480 AM WPWC. WeActRadio.com.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
But I just don't subscribe to the common memes, and I don't subscribe to either political parties anymore because they don't represent us. They represent, their own interest, obviously, and furthering their own interests, and furthering the interest of wealthy financiers who obviously pay for them to get elected, and that's who they serve. So what do you do in this situation where obviously changing the players doesn't change the game? It's like you can vote, but don't spend more than 5 minutes on it. Then the time it takes to go to the polls and pull the lever and then move on, and then get back out in the streets and protest with your signs and raise awareness and educate people.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
And that comes from reading. I mean, really, you have to start reading alternative critical thinkers, the Noam Chomskys of the world, the late Howard Zinn, people who document these things. Activism is what brings about change, and change comes from physically being in the streets. The biggest lie is that I'm an internet activist. Well, there's no such thing. You're either an activist or you're not, but there is no internet activist. It's like, that means you don't get out of the house, which means you don't really accomplish anything. You're not organizing, you're not getting people together in the streets, you're not actually pushing for a real change that you want to see, you're just more talking about it online, which is the same as a conference call.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
We got no plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Fighter like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending.
This is your moment of clarity from LeeCamp.net. The academic journal Perspectives on Politics published the first ever scientific study of whether our country is a democracy or an oligarchy, meaning ruled by a small class of elites, government by a few. And although it's not in the Webster's Dictionary, I'd say it's government by a few douche monkeys. But Webster's is never up on the modern language. Did you know they still don't have the expression bucket of tater twats? I had to go elsewhere to find that definition. Not there. I check every day. Anyway, the study used a unique data set that includes measures of the key variables of 1,779 policy issues. A massive undertaking. I didn't even know there were that many policy issues. If I were asked to name all the policy issues, I could. Let's see, got abortion, immigration, whether it's okay to pay a cheap hooker with ice cream, whether fat people have to buy 2 tickets on an airplane, whether an unborn child can own a firearm. That's it, I think. But luckily, academics are smarter than me, and they studied 1,779 policy issues, taking variables into account, and found that the U.S. system of government is, drumroll please, oligarchy! The U.S. is an oligarchy. Tell the contestants what they've won, Bob. They've won little to no say in the policy decisions of their country. They've also won a media that relays the message of the elites despite the reality for most Americans. That media will largely be staffed and run by other elites who have little to no connection to the common man. Policy choices such as massive trade deals or pipelines cutting across the country will be conceived, fleshed out, promoted, and voted on by a small group of oligarchs. The people have also won a history book, which is where they'll have to go if they want to learn about what real democracy looked like. But we're not done. They also won a new car, which is where they'll be living after their foreclosure. And in the new car, they can cook their meals on their new George Foreman grill. Watch the fat just drip off. If it makes you feel any better, you can call it oligarchy with a hint of democracy, but really that's like being on fire with a hint of water. Kinda still on fire. This is a study that every American should know about. Every man, woman, and child should know that the Democratic Republic we claim to be proud of has been wrested away from us and put in the hands of a few hundred rich, white, male motherfuckers. And fine, if you want to split hairs about it, there's 3 women and 2 black guy motherfuckers who've been added just to spice things up a little. The study said the preferences of your average American have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. This is an academic study that you won't hear about on the corporate media. All right, the diagnosis is finally in. Our system has cancer. Are we gonna try and fight it, or just lay back and pretend the doctor was wrong? Pretend that this doesn't matter. We can change this. We have the power. And now we also have a George Foreman grill. That's been your moment of clarity from LeeCamp.net. My new comedy special, We Are Nothing, comes out very soon. Keep checking LeeCamp.net for the details. Keep fighting.
Part-time job at minimum wage. I feel like I'm an economic slave. But baby, I'm moving on.
Hey friends, Jacob Dean here with exciting news. You can now hear my show, Filter Free Radio, on the free Stitcher mobile app. Just visit our website, filterfreeradio.com, scroll down on the left-hand side, and click on the Stitcher logo to hear us on Stitcher. That's all there is to it. No syncing, no taking up memory on your device. Just Filter Free Radio on demand for you on the go. Plus, you can rate and review Filter Free Radio on Stitcher. The more you rate, review, and share us, the higher we will rank on Stitcher, and that means the more people will discover Filter Free Radio. It's never been easier to enjoy Filter Free Radio and help us spread the word. Visit our website, filterfreeradio.com, and click on the Stitcher logo to hear us on Stitcher. Unfiltered radical truth-telling, anytime, anywhere. Thanks, and keep up the good fight.
Warning, what you are about to hear will not be heard anywhere else. Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott. Better than news, better than talk. It's Filter Free Radio.
And welcome back to the second hour of the show, broadcasting live at filterfreeradio.com. RadioOrNot.com, also on Liberal Justice Radio on the TuneIn app, TuneIn.com. We are also on We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. WeActRadio.com. However you are joining us, it is so good to be with you and participate in the unfiltered conversation. We want to hear from you. That's what it's all about. You and I showing up, getting active and making a difference and participate. And at the very, 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 very basic level of that, it starts with a conversation. And we're having that conversation right here, right now. Just think of it as having a conversation with your best friend, having a beer or whatever. I'm having a cup of coffee. And we're telling the truth, talking like it is. Like, people are already having these conversations at home. They just, we can't talk about it outside of the privacy of our home because it's taboo to talk about. Capitalism is the crisis. 503-746-TALK is our telephone number. You can call that right now live and go on the air with us. You can also call that number anytime, 24/7, anytime, day or night. Make it your... When you go out to the protest and you show up and you participate in the activism, call 503-746-TALK live from the event and tell me what's happening and give us a live report on our comment line. You can do whatever you want. Actually. You can do whatever you want. It's open, it's unfiltered, it's free. 503-746-TALK. And you can also find all of the other ways to contact us at our website, filterfreeradio.com. So good to have you on board. And Skeptical Scott with us, back in action. And it's always good to have you on board, buddy. I always appreciate it, man. You the man. Who's the man? You the man.
No, you the man. No. It's just your world. I'm living in it.
No. It's the oligarchs and plutocrats world, man. We're just making them rich.
Yeah, pretty much.
Isn't it? Yep. So, anyways, isn't it time for a new declaration? This is a conversation I want to have this hour, and I also want to invite your thoughts, your comments, and your ideas, 503-746-TALK. Isn't it time for a new declaration? Nothing wrong with the old, Declaration of Independence. Pretty good, right? There was some problems with the initial, fundamental ideas of the founding of this country, on the back of slave labor and round up, all the people that were the others and, herd them off. And, that aside, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution is okay. We take a lot of things for granted. Our right to free speech, our right to free press, the redress of grievances, and the right to not incriminate ourselves. We have lots of rights. It's good stuff. But I also think it is time to kind of, update things that have been outdated for a few hundred years. It's time for a new declaration. What would you add to the new declaration? I would love to know. 503-746-TALK. There was an article written a while back, and we've covered this on our show a couple of times, but it is important to bring up for two reasons. One, we just spent the last hour of the show talking about an economic system, and all social and economic systems are dependent upon a living planet. So therefore, the health of the real world is primary. And we'll talk about that in the new declaration. Shouldn't we add that to the new declaration? And two, like I said, last week, it was Easter Sunday. It was 420. And those of you who recall, 420 also happens to be the anniversary of the BP oil disaster. And here up in Portland, Oregon, or in the state of Oregon, we are fighting all sorts of environmental impedances on our human, quality of life. Things like the coal exporting. We want to bring this, barge in oil and all this other crap. It's scary. So it's time to at least start a conversation about what should the new declaration include. And this is an article written by Derek Jensen, and it was originally published at occupiedmedia.us. It's OCCUPIED media.us was the original website. It was published a couple of years ago, written by Derek Jensen. It's called The New Declaration. We got to put a link to it, a new link up, but I don't have that ready yet. But he starts out the article. We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is, not crap we're making up. This is self-evident observations, friends. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that the real physical world is the source of our lives, you and I's lives, and the lives of others. A weakened planet a weakened world, which is the source of our lives, is less capable of supporting that life. Your life, my life, human or otherwise, any life. Thus, the health of the world, the real world, should be primary. More important than any social or economical or political system. Because all of those social, economic, political, etc. systems are dependent upon the living planet. Is this not self-evident? What would you add to the new declaration? 503-746-TALK. It is self-evident that to value a social system that harms the planet's capacity to support life over life itself is to be out of touch with physical reality. Any way of life based on the use of non-renewable resources is by definition not sustainable. Call or ask and you shall receive. Our comment line is working, and you can call in at 503-746-TALK. And we have on the line with us our good friend, Mr. Mark Taylor Canfield. What's up, brother? What's on your mind?
Hey, I've been watching the show, so keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you, buddy.
There's a couple, there are some events that are happening. By the way, join us in the chat room. We're having a good time. But I would say that there are some events coming up in Seattle that might relate directly to the theme of tonight's show, and I'll give a quick report on those. There's a $15 an hour minimum wage national conference happening in Seattle on the 26th, April 26th, and the speakers that are going to be at that conference are pretty interesting because it's David K. Johnston, who's an investigative journalist and author. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 2001, and he is also the author of Free Lunch, Perfectly Legal, and The Fine Print. And his latest collection is called Divided, The Perils of Our Growing Inequality.
Mm-hmm.
The other speaker is Glenn Ford from Black Agenda Report, and he was the founding member of the Washington chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists.
We love Glenn Ford.
And he's also on the board of National Alliance of Third World Journalists. Very interesting guy. And then following up after them is David Goldstein, a.k.a. Goldie, who is the founder and blogger-in-chief at horsesass.org. And also a former staff writer at The Stranger magazine, and he's also blogged at Huffington Post and Daily Kos. So he had his own show called The David Goldstein Show on a news talk station in Seattle called KIRO for a couple years, but then sort of got moved off the air because he's a little bit too outspoken. So that's the news from Seattle. The other issue that folks will be talking about, especially with this wave of action issue and the climate march, which has actually been taking place across the country. In Seattle, there are a group of activists who are not directly affiliated officially, I guess, with any kind of Occupy group, but they are calling for a reoccupation of the original Occupy Seattle encampment at Westlake Park on Earth Day. So the backstory there is, it remains to be seen how the authority is going to react to that, because our last mayor, his position was sort of like, hey, I really support you guys, keep up the good work, and then I'm going to arrest your asses. Well, this time we have a new mayor named Ed Murray, but The Stranger magazine just did a cover article on how he is now, the mouthpiece for the police department, which we know has been under a Department of Justice investigation for a long time due to allegations of excessive use of force. But it remains to be seen. We were hoping that the new mayor would be a reformist mayor when it comes to civil rights issues and police accountability. But according to Dominic Holden, one of the editors at The Stranger magazine, he has fallen by the wayside and will probably side with the police at this point.
Tragic.
And then in direct response to your declaration, I presented a declaration called Declaration of Independence from Wall Street, which you guys actually ended up posting.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, July 4th for the National Occupy gathering that was taking place that year. And that was kind of my response to what you're talking about, is how do we make a statement that makes sense? And if you don't mind, I'll read a little bit of it.
I pulled it up in front of me because I have it saved on the computer. Yeah, go ahead, man. It's great. I love it.
So I won't read the whole thing, but it starts with, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for people to dissolve the economic and political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature entitle them, a decent respect for the opinions of the world community requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to that separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. Notice it didn't say men. That they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Amen.
So I basically quoted from Thomas Jefferson most of the way through, but as part of his declaration, the Continental Congress at that time felt that they needed to state clearly to the world what their grievances with King George were and the British Empire, because they wanted people to know why they're doing this. So as part of what I said about that is, to prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world, that multinational corporations and Wall Street financiers have falsely claimed to have the same rights as individual human beings, accepted public bailouts, and subsequently refused to establish necessary reforms, invested trillions of dollars in high-risk derivatives and speculative finance and trading schemes, putting the U.S. and the entire world economy at risk, protected the interests of the wealthiest members of society while enforcing austerity measures on the poor and middle class, including cuts to funding for vital social services, public health care, education, and transportation, supported and promoted destructive international trade agreements which undermine democracy and violate the sovereignty of the people, taken away our homes, devalued our pension funds, contributed to writing federal and local government regulations in a manner which favors corporate profit and endangers the public health, safety, and welfare, controlled our electoral system through unlimited funding of political campaigns, dominated our financial system with economic policies resulting in the outsourcing of jobs, high unemployment, lower wages, cuts to health, dental, and pension benefits for workers, and widespread suffering and impoverishment for the people. Now, it continues on with these points, right. But what I really wanted to say at the end was that basically after the violations of the Bill of Rights and protections on freedom of speech, assembly, privacy, and due process of law, including extrajudicial, the right to extrajudicial drone assassinations of U.S. citizens in other countries under the provisions of the War on Terror regime. I list a lot of that. The weakened fourth estate, which is the press, through mass commercialization and corporate consolidation of the media, resulting in loss of press freedom. And so at the very end, what I said is, we therefore the people do solemnly...
I'm just saying, if I may, Mark, can you start with the paragraph where you say, we, therefore, the people, do solemnly publish and declare, and read that paragraph, because I've got it in front of me, and it is absolutely brilliant, and I know we covered it when it came out, but we are talking about the new declaration this hour, and this is Mark Taylor Canfield's Declaration of Independence from Wall Street. Can you read that paragraph, Mark, because it's brilliant, and it's your words, so...
We, therefore, the people, do solemnly publish and declare that we are, and of right, ought to be free and independent from corporate domination and control of our economy, our government, and our electoral systems, that we are absolved from all allegiance to the corrupt bankers on Wall Street, and that all political connection between them and the government of the United States of America is and ought to be totally dissolved, that we, as free and independent states, have full power to protect the rights of the people, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish trade, and do all other acts and things which independent states may do without influence, intervention, or interference from corporate interests. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on our solidarity with people all around the world who are struggling against tyranny to establish peace and freedom, we pledge to each other our mutual aid, assistance, and support.
You got it down, brother. We need to put a link up to that, a new fresh link up at the top of our Facebook page or something for that, because folks want to check that out if they missed that, the last time we covered that. And by the way, if I may, just because we do breaking news occasionally, I have absolutely huge breaking news as of 1 minute ago. Jill Stein just followed us on Twitter. That's a big deal. Let me hit this. So, Scott, jump in there, brother. Scott, jump in there.
That's funny, dude.
Yeah. Good stuff. Anyways, yeah, Mark, I love it, dude. I totally forgot about your Declaration of Independence from Wall Street, and that's perfect because this is exactly what I'm asking folks to call in and talk about. And I'm so happy you called in to share that, man, because I forgot it. And it's been a little while, since we heard that, but it's always good to revisit things because the amnesia is so rampant, admit guilty here. So, yeah, good stuff, brother.
Thank you for giving people an opportunity to discuss these issues. And while you were talking about capitalism, I kept thinking of economist David Korten, who's a part of the editorial staff at Yes Magazine up here in Washington State, at one of his public addresses. And what he said was that as he was trained as an economist to believe that free enterprise with equal opportunity was the way that the economy was supposed to work. And he said that would be great if it were true, but unfortunately what we have is monopoly capitalism in the United States, where the mom and pop shops get pushed aside while the big multinational corporations move in and take the market away and delocalize everything. So that was what I was thinking while you guys were discussing that issue.
Yeah, screw Walmart.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's what happens in general. I mean, ideally we wouldn't be in this stage, but that's the natural progression of capitalism. So we are in the cancer stages or the cannibalistic stage of capitalism, where monopolies dominate. That's the whole goal at this point, really.
Yeah, play Monopoly. The goal of Monopoly is to win all the money and make everyone else in the poorhouse so they don't have no money, end up homeless on the streets of Monopoly, and you win the game when you have all the money and everyone else is poor on the streets or in jail or whatever. It's reality. It's not just a game anymore. It is reality. The oligarchs and the plutocrats are winning. The counter-revolution is winning, and we are living in revolutionary times, but we can go on, man.
Thank you, Brother West.
Yeah. And real quick, while I do have you on the line, man, I know last week I played the birthday shout out and everything, and you called in and you only had like 60 seconds, man. And it was real rushed and everything, but I wanted to just thank you again, Mark, for that shout out on national radio on Norman Goldman show. That's a big deal. Maybe 2 or 3 people found us from that, and that's great. So I can't thank you enough, man, for everything that you're doing. Aside from the brilliant and radically fearless independent journalism that you do on a daily basis. Can you let folks know who may never have heard you, man, because we're on a new radio station now, and We Act Radio in Washington, D.C. Let folks know where they can find out more of your work, Mark.
Yeah, actually, that's one thing I never talk about for some reason is I actually have a free online newspaper at paper.li. And if you subscribe, you'll get a daily news digest from sources that I sort of go through and edit, and it's also got an automated editing program, which is kind of cool, where I can set the RSS feeds on specific topics. But it's called Global News Feed. So if you go to paper.li, which is paper.li, you can look for Global News Feed, just subscribe for free, and every day you will get a little message in your email, and you can go and check out what all sorts of people around the world are saying, and I just tend to stick to sources that I like and trust, and then the things that I write or the videos that we come up with end up on there as well. But what I want to tell you guys is you were talking about some really important issues earlier, which is basically what I'm finding strange about all this new media is that it seems to be the same ongoing conversation that people are having in person to person in private or sometimes in public, but it's an ongoing conversation that I hear every single day of my life. And today I had a conversation with a local member of a community council about, their struggle with dealing with all this corporate power and this feeling like they're being pushed aside and ignored. And I was telling her that actually I've had the same experience in corporate media, but also even in some alternative media. So my response to her was, look, go to Filter Free Radio.
Yeah.
And start to hear the truth, because what I told her was, I know you're discouraged. I know that you are not as effective as you would like to be against all of this money, but tell the truth. That's all you can do. And actually, at a certain point, you kind of have to let the cards fall where they may. But if you're feeling this compulsion to speak out, then find a place where you can do it and find other people who are doing it, and you will feel so much better. You may not solve the problem today, but at least you can start wrapping your head around ideas and solutions.
Bingo.
And I think that the independent media is a very, very important part of this picture. Yep. It's the only place now where people actually tell the truth and can talk about things openly and inspire other people to do the same.
Bingo.
And as long as the corporations do not control the purse strings, then people can actually do this truth-telling. And so kudos to you and We Act Radio and Space Dog and all the folks, the Liberal Justice Radio Network and Indie Media Weekly, and everybody who's trying to do this, because it's really, I think, a part of the new paradigm, which is people are going to get really disinterested in what this major corporate, multinational corporation media network has to say to them, when they can go on their smartphone and listen to you guys out of Portland and Washington, D.C., and actually hear people talking about what they talk about instead of someone else setting the agenda. And then another part of that is just the fact that even working with so-called public radio, that was kind of a low blow, but it's public knowledge that there were issues with even Pacifica Radio Network, which was started by a bunch of pacifists and was part of the free speech movement out of Berkeley. But even they had a coup a few years ago on their board of directors, and the group that I worked with for 6 years, Free Speech Radio News, had problems with them wanting to control the editorial content, which is why we set up a separate foundation called Pacifica Reporters Against Censorship. And if you can get away from the folks who want to pull the funding and throw you off the air, which are friends like Norman Golan, Mike Malloy, all sorts of other, Randy Rhodes now, are experiencing, then it does insulate you from some of these political changes in the wind. And if people can find ways to keep the program sustained, even if we have to, really sacrifice to do it, I think that there will be an opportunity to tell the truth. So to me, that's one of the solutions and one of the answers is get out there, start your own blogs, do your own live stream channel, tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. And the people who want to hear it will listen to you, and believe me, they need to hear it. And there are a lot of people out there who tell me every day that they just want to hear someone telling the truth. Mark, where can I go? Well, you do what Jello Biafra said. You stop bitching about the media and you become the media. So there you go.
Mark, I love it, brother. And folks can find Mark Taylor Canfield's reporting on Twitter at mtaylorcanfield, and on Facebook, facebook.com/mtaylorcanfield, as well as check out the global news feed paper.li global news feed. Mark, we got to run to a break at the bottom of the hour. Thanks again for calling in, man. We love it. Keep up the good work. And you always have an unfiltered platform here to speak the truth, brother. So that's what it's all about. Thank you again.
We're really enjoying what you're doing. Thanks, Jacob and Scott. Thanks for doing your live stream today. We're enjoying it. See you next time.
Thanks for calling, buddy.
And we'll continue this unfiltered conversation. We'll take your calls, 503-746-TALK. And Mark Taylor Canfield mentioned our good friend Space Dog of Space Dog Radio, spacedogradio.com. I'm playing the Space Dog Radio Report next on Filter Free Radio. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Giving the finger to mainstream media. FilterFreeRadio.com.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Talking about developing a new radical revolution of values. Talking about progressing forward. Talking about change. And if we're so subject to beholden to the status quo, we've prevented ourselves from progressing forward. It's like if Hillary Clinton is the Democratic Party, which she is, then it's time for us to abandon the Democratic Party.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
1 + 1 is 11, people. Don't you? I thought that... Anyways.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
From someplace out of this world, this is the Space Dog from SpaceDogRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in to Filter Free Radio. Filter Free Radio, your independent radio source for all things good and progressive. Check them out. Hey, if you missed any shows from Space Dog Radio last week, here's a little bit of what went on. From someplace over Washington, D.C., USA, this is a Space Dog Radio show. I'm a Space Dog. Thanks for tuning in. Space Dog Radio, your remote location radio station, coming to you 24/7 around the planet and throughout the universe from SpaceDogRadio.com. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Twitter at Space Dog Radio. Shouts out to our friends over Filter Free Radio, independent radio, FilterFreeRadio.com. Jacob Dean is the mastermind over there. You can hear him live 4 to 6 Pacific, 7 to 9 Eastern, and not only broadcasting from his online station, but across the airwaves now in Washington, D.C. Support independent media masterminds. I'll put a link on SpaceDogRadio.com. So there's a new awareness coming up about the TPP. That is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If you don't know about this, you've probably been living in a cave or under a rock. But this is one of the most detrimental agreements that is in work by our government, which is so just elusive and so secret. No one really knows anything about it except for it's totally NAFTA on steroids. I've said it a million times on Space Talk Radio. We did a show about it last year. We did a show about it the first part of this year, and we're doing a show about it now because it's very important. There's something that was just published on an excellent website, and I'll put a link on SpaceDogRadio.com, from TradeWatch.org. And the title, quote, "The rising use of trade pact sales pitch of last resort. TPP, foreign policy's argument, mimic false claims made for past deals." And it raises certain awareness of the duplication of effort for huge multinational trade agreements such as NAFTA that hurt economies not only in America but around the world. They cited these quotes, which are amazingly similar, though years apart. Decades of the same foreign policy arguments. Quote, 1993 arguments for North American Free Trade Agreement. The passage of NAFTA has become a critical and, yes, symbolic test of U.S. leadership in the post-Cold War era. To vote the agreement down threatens America's position in the global economy and could be one more step in making the United States a second-rate power. Who said that and when? Republican Dan Glickman, November 16th, 1993. Fast forward 2014, arguments for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The question is whether the U.S. will take a leadership role in shaping a new course that reflects American values or whether we'll stand on the sidelines as a new order unfolds. The TPP has become a symbol of American staying power. We must see it through. And who said this and when? Vice President Joe Biden, February 27th, 2014. Over 20 years apart, yet essentially saying the exact same thing. And what have we seen with NAFTA was outsourcing, loss of jobs, loss of American industry, and all types of impact around the world. Have we learned nothing from that? Why are politicians allowed to secretly even entertain the thought of TPP, which can not only impact Americans, but the rest of the world by unleashing corporate greed and the lawyers that protect them around the world? I strongly suggest you visit www.exposethetpp.org and support the fight against the TPP if you haven't already. I'll put a link on it on spacedogradio.com, of course. We only ask that you get involved. You contact those in Congress and your lawmakers, so-called lawmakers, and ask them to please do their job and protect our jobs. Special thanks to FilterFreeRadio.com for not only putting on a great show, but for allowing Space Dog Radio to fly along with them. From someplace out of this world, this has been the Space Dog for SpaceDogRadio.com. Be safe, be happy, and I'll catch you next orbit.
Progressives across the country are taking action, from Madison, Wisconsin, to the Occupy movement. And now, Washington, D.C.'s newest talk radio station, We Act Radio. Progressive talk returns to our nation's capital. We Act Radio is proud to showcase the biggest names in progressive talk radio, including Stephanie Miller, Tom Hartman, Bill Press, Ed Schultz, Sam Cedar, and original live shows from our Anacostia studios. Speak Easy with Kamon Freeman and Ron Pinchback. Available on your radio dial and on the web at weactradio.com. That's We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C. Truth is our product.
This is Liberal Justice Radio.
Now here's a place you always meet a lot of friends.
Liberal Justice Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott on 1480 AM WPWC every Sunday from 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. WeActRadio.com.
And welcome back to the show. So good to have you with us. Your open mic, your unfiltered platform to speak the truth. Tell us how you feel. It is open for you right now. 503-746-TALK. 503-746-TALK. You can also call us anytime, 24/7. On demand for you, 503-746-TALK, and participate in the conversation. Here, that is not controlled by the corporate state. Here, it is not controlled and bought and paid for commercial radio. Our opinions are not paid for. I don't take a dime from them. And we have nothing to fear here other than, well, being the radical truth tellers that we are, right? And one of the things that Mark Taylor Canfield mentioned before the break was, the control of the corporate state. And this hour we're talking about what should be the new declaration. What would you add to the new declaration? I want to get back to the Derek Jensen article in just a second, but if you missed this and you missed the conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago talking about the Progressive Radio Northwest Forum in Seattle, we talked about how the corporate state and commercial radio will not sustain anything that works against its own best interest, like progressive radio. Bain Capital and capitalism and the corporate state doesn't give a crap about KPOJ in Portland or KPTK in Seattle or Green 960 in San Francisco, and now they don't give a crap about the Randy Rhoads Show. Seen this one coming. Definitely seen this one coming, okay? If you're surprised that the Randy Rhoads Show is getting kicked off the air, clearly you missed our coverage of the Seattle Radio Forum on Filter Free Radio. There's a link to it on our homepage. It's a very important conversation. I recorded myself live at the event that I participated in with Mark Taylor Canfield and Space Dog of Space Dog Radio and the folks at Progressive Radio Northwest. It's a fine thing, and you should check it out. It's there. It's good stuff. So the comment line is open. Ask and you shall receive. All callers go to the front of the line. You don't have to be a good friend of the show to go to the front of the line. Anyone who calls will go on the air. It is unfiltered. There's no one else here. So when you call the comment line, it's just going to ring and ring and ring and ring. And I'm going to pick up and you're going to be on the air. And on the air with us is another good friend of the show and chat room supporter who's in the chat room there at radioornot.com as well, participating. Mr. Snork Y2K, our brother from another mother. What's going on, buddy? What's on your mind?
Privatization. If there was anything I wanted to take out with a new amendment or any type of redirection, of the government, it would be to take it back to what Ben Franklin originally set up, where the items that were the rails that the economy moved on, or that we used to protect each other, the community. He wanted that to be something that's shared in cost across all of us, and not be something for profit. And that included what he came up with, the fire department and the libraries and stuff like that. And I recently had to use an ambulance, and it's automatic. You don't, once you call 911, the ambulance is set. You don't get to shop or anything. Shows up to your door, you pay what they charge. And that doesn't come out of your insurance. You have to pay that in cash.
Yep.
That should be back to being like it was when I was a kid, run by the fire department.
Right.
And other features. Everything keeps getting privatized. One company that I'm aware of owns 75,000 school buses in the United States. It's not even an American company. And their data is stored in Mexico, where corruption, if anybody wanted to kidnap a school bus full of children, that's where they go to bribe. So there's no safety of the data kept on where the children, who they are, what their age is, any of that. And that's just one of the school bus companies that's outsourced.
Right.
It used to be that all of the school systems had their own busing system, and now it's
every municipality.
And safety is really compromised.
I'm so with you. We should not be privatizing the commons. And you know, we use the word privatize. I like to use the word profitize. Same thing, right? We got to take the for-profit model out of the commons. And something that I want to do a show about, and something that maybe I'll help start organizing, is, what can we actually start a nonviolent, successful social movement around in 2014 in the United States of lazy couch potatoes, is maybe the movement for the new 21st century commons, which is the internet, in my opinion, to not be privatized. I don't believe that anyone should have to pay to access information on the internet. And that's a radical idea today, but I really think that we might be able to go there at some point if we want to give our future a chance.
As far as another one of Ben Franklin's commons go, I don't see the internet as anything different than the modern version of Ben Franklin's post office.
Bingo.
And it should be handled under the post office, as well as the FCC should be under the post office. The dissemination of information, and maybe it would be more just and fair that way.
Yeah.
And return it as a national function, not a privatized organization.
Amen to that.
Yeah. We're with you, buddy. We're with you.
As somebody who just moved and doesn't have internet or television at home because it's a monopoly or duopoly between two companies, and is just overwhelmed by the expense that has to be outlaid to get one of these things into your house, it's criminal. I mean, especially when you consider what other countries have. We're so far behind the times. These for-profit industries that provide internet service, it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's a scam, man. I mean,
boondoggle.
Well, they give you, this at best you get a discount for 3, 6, 9 months or a year, and then all of a sudden your rate double, goes up 30%, and and they do contracts, and even then it's like, what is my rate increasing for? Because you're not providing a better service, and by the way, your service is 10 times or 100 times slower than that of Europe, which pays a fraction of what we pay. It's insanity how far behind the times we are, and that's sort of what planned obsolescence is about. And we live in a capitalist society where the planned obsolescence is built into pretty much everything, not just automobiles anymore. But look at our internet, for example. I mean, I remember when I used to pay $10 a month for dial-up, and now I'm paying $80 a month for high-speed internet. Of course, it's faster, but the things are supposed to go up in quality and down in price. I mean, I should be paying $10 a month for that same internet. Obviously, except for now, the technology is that much better, and it's like. But no, I'm paying 8 times the amount, and the speed's about faster. It's just so frustrating, and it's a necessity. I mean, you have to have internet. I'm not going to get television. I'm definitely going to do without television. That's
a good start.
Another commons that I'd like to see return to the people is anything below ground, or water that's coming up from the ground. You should not be able to buy it and then make a profit off it at the exclusion of everybody else. That is definitely a commons as well as mines. Many people aren't aware that almost the entire Chicago suburbs are on hollow ground. They're over mines where all of the limestone rights were sold from underneath Chicago. If there's an earthquake, the Chicago suburbs are extremely vulnerable to all these mines collapsing. And I'm not talking about like one mine per every 10 miles. There are communities like Villa Park, large communities, where the entire community is basically on columns of rock every 50 feet, and all the rest has been mined out and then burned with all the wood that used to be around Chicago and coal to make limestone, to make the cement to build the buildings.
Good God, seriously?
Seriously. And Chicago is not the only community like that. You'll find that in Ohio. You'll find that in the northeastern states. Wherever you have the large cities, there is a collar of communities around them that are completely hollow underneath. It's another hazard waiting to be exposed. And when it does, it'll be catastrophic, and we'll be wondering why we let this happen.
And they're all right near the lakes, too. You think they would flood.
Yes. They're all near lakes or under lakes, and a lot of them are in topologies where once the water starts getting down there, other areas will be compromised. And a good example of that is down in Louisiana, where they built the salt mines underneath the ocean or the Gulf. And once one was compromised, suddenly they have parishes in Louisiana that are no longer solid and are dissolving. I mean, a parish is what they basically call a county.
Yeah.
And they're just disappearing.
Good grief.
And of course, they stored also in the caves that were empty. They stored radioactive waste and extremely toxic waste, which is now mixed in with their water tables.
Oh my God! Damn! How come I never heard all this stuff, dude? That's crazy.
I'll send you some links.
Yeah, sounds good, buddy. Let's do a show. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man. I love lore. I mean, that's the thing about
coming up next week on Filter Free Radio. No, just kidding. But soon.
That's the evolution of understanding. I mean, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And the more I learn about these things from people like yourself and other historians who have done the research and know just little tidbits of the evolution of our society, you realize, good God, we're going 180 degrees. We've gone 360 or 180 or whatever it is, 180. And so we're back to the new Gilded Age. But the things that have been done in the past are really coming back to bite us in the butt, and they've been put on steroids. And of course, what you speak of is just, I can imagine an entire suburb of Chicago just disappearing into the ground.
Yeah.
I can totally see that happen.
What happens is, as we get these rains, the city of Chicago itself had a rain in its suburbs in 1994, I think it was, either somewhere in that range, where the house that I lived in, we had 17 inches of rain in 1 hour. It sounded weird. I mean, it's just a massive amount of rain in 1 hour, and it created all kinds of sinkholes in the area. But if that were to happen over one of the communities that's hollowed out underneath, you would see the sinkholes popping up all over, sucking down neighborhoods. Because once the water starts flowing, it picks up bits of debris, and that abrasion just takes out the columns that are holding it up.
I think
pretty soon, before you know it, you're going to find that Corvette museums and stuff are going to disappear into holes over these objects.
Right. I think it's fair to say we can add to the new declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident that the current way of life is not sustainable and it will collapse, maybe literally. So the only real questions are what are going to be left after, that collapse, and how bad is it going to be, and what are we going to do about it, and how prepared are we? So it's pretty self-evident, right? And I love it, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you I really appreciate your call, Snork, and we always love hearing from you, buddy. And we hope all is well, and we're always with you, man. Hang in there. And I want to give you a parting shot because I do want to read a couple more quotes before we end the show from this the new declaration from Derek Jensen, which I love. But I want to give you another parting shot, though, bud, before we let you go.
Well, I'll be giving a science demonstration in about 2 weeks in a public high school.
Excellent.
Nice.
What can we well, if you want to promote it or talk about it, you're more than welcome to. or we can.
I haven't got the okay from the lawyer yet.
Okay, sounds good. When that happens, give me a call, bud. And you always have an unfiltered open mic here, and you know that, man. So we always appreciate you, and we love you. And if folks want to, find out more or check out, Snork, he's always in the chat room, and we're always hanging out there and having a good time. So we love you, buddy, and hang in there, man. And always appreciate the call.
Bye.
All right, and. We've got 5 minutes left, and what I'm going to do is I want to read a couple lines from this, the new declaration by Derek Jensen, then I want to throw it to Scott for his final thoughts. But the reality is it's time for a new declaration, and it is time to identify the truths that are self-evident. The truth that is self-evident that any way of life based on the hyper-exploitation of renewable resources is by definition not sustainable. For example, if fewer salmon return every year, eventually there are going to be no salmon returning, right? The real world is interdependent, and if you harm one link of the chain, it eventually will wrap around to the rest of the chain. You cannot argue with physics. If you burn carbon-based fuels, this carbon will go into the air and it will have effects on the real world. And the real physical world is the source of our lives and the lives of others, and that a weakened planet is less capable of supporting that life. Thus, the health of the real world is primary, more important than any social or economic system, because all social or economic systems are dependent upon a living planet. It is self-evident that no one, talking about the first hour, it is self-evident that no one, no matter how rich, no matter how powerful, should be allowed to create poisons for which there is no antidote. Nuclear power. No one, it is self-evident, no matter how rich or powerful, should be allowed to create the messes that cannot be cleaned up. No one, no matter how rich or powerful, should be allowed to destroy places humans or non-humans need to survive. No one, no matter rich or how powerful, should be allowed to drive human cultures or non-human species extinct. The reality trumps all beliefs. We hold the truth to be self-evident that what you believe is not nearly so important as what is real. That on a finite planet you can not have an economy based on or requiring growth forever. It is unsustainable. The current way of life is not sustainable, and it will collapse. And the only real questions are what will be left of the world after that collapse happens. How bad will the things be for those who are coming after that? We hold it as self-evident that we should do all that we can to make sure as much of the real physical world remains intact until the collapse of the current system happens, and that humans and non-humans should be as prepared as possible for the collapse. We also hold the truth to be self-evident that corporations do not exist in any real sense. They are legal fictions. Corporations are not living beings, and they are certainly not human beings. They are limited liability corporations. They are institutions created explicitly to separate human beings from the effects of their actions by making them, by definition, inhumane and inhuman. And to the degree we desire to live in a human and humane world, and really to the degree that we wish to survive, limited liability corporations need to be eliminated. If we as a people fail to rid our communities of destructive institutions, those institutions will destroy our communities. And if we in our communities cannot provide meaningful and non-destructive ways for people to gain food, clothing, shelter, we must recognize it is not specific destructive institutions, but the entire economic system that is pushing the natural world past its breaking points. Capitalism is killing the planet. Industrial civilization is killing the planet. Once we've recognized the destructiveness of capitalism and industrial civilization, both of which are based on systematically converting a living planet into dead commodities, we have no choice, unless we wish to sign our own and our own children's death warrants, but to fight for all we're worth in every way we can to overturn it. Scott, brother, 60 seconds, man. Your final take home, your final message, your parting shot, man.
Well, I just encourage people to go over to either commondreams.org or truthdig.com and read Chris Hedges' article today. It's a
which we never talked about.
I know, thanks, man. It's called The Rhetoric of Violence, but it outlays a lot of what we talked about today. And one of the things I like to leave people with is where he says, we must begin to speak in the language of revolution, not accommodation. We must direct a rage that grips huge swaths of the population, not against the oppressed, not against minorities, but against the structures of corporate power that create oppression. We will have to begin from scratch, for America has no revolutionary intellectual tradition, with the exception of Thomas Paine. But we have produced notable anarchists, and he goes on to list quite a few, including Noam Chomsky, Emma Goldman, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X. But we have no more anarchists that are as astute about the evils of empire as white supremacy. And we once had some fine socialists, but we now lack the genuine revolutionists, such as Alexander Herzen, Karl Marx, Frederick Engels, Vladimir Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, Gramsci, and we are losing. And because of this, because we lack the intellectual language, we are losing the class war. And violence is becoming the language with which people communicate with one another. 282 people are shot every day in the United States. The United States has the highest rate of gun ownership, an average of 90 out of 100 people own a gun. We shoot each other and we shoot ourselves. It's essentially a form of suicide. And so the point here is that as things become harder and harder, as the screws get turned, as more and more people begin to suffer, and these inexplicable grievances that they cannot, understand where it comes from and why, and they seek for demagogues and they seek to blame somebody. And of course, the easiest person is those who are more oppressed than you and the suffering and minorities and things. So that's what's so dangerous about the Tea Party. That's what these people have done. The very wealthy have turned the anger of the middle class and the lower class against each other and against government rather than against themselves, obviously, which corporations are the evil. Yeah, imagine that. And so we need to begin to speak in the language of revolution, and we need to build a culture of revolution in order to have any real change in our society.
You get the final word, man. We are flat out of time. I have to thank everyone who makes this show possible. I want to thank Mark Taylor Canfield and Snork Y2K for calling in on the comment line. You can always make your voice heard, 503-746-TALK. I want to thank my super duper awesome kick-ass brother from another mother co-host, the one, the only Skeptical Scott, for laying it down. You the man, brother. Love you. Sorry, the Portland Trailblazers are going to beat the Rockets. It just is what it is. I got to thank Nicole Sandler.
Not.
Love you, buddy. Got to thank Nicole Sandler for syndicating us on her RadioOrNot.com network. Thanks to Kenny Pick for syndicating us on Liberal Justice Radio. Thanks to Kevin McLeod of Incompetech and Dano of DanoSongs.com for music production. Thanks to our webmaster, website guru, Shano, for giving us the awesome website and getting us on We Act Radio. Thanks to the one, the only We Act Radio, 1480 AM, for carrying the program. Thank you. Huge thanks to you, the listeners, our friends, for liking our show, spreading the word. We are independent, we are grassroots, and we only grow when you tell friends. So tell your friends. Love you, friends in the chat room. Love the conversation. Appreciate it very much. And don't forget, we need you to get out there and get active and help participate. Be the change. We have to be the change, and we have to make the difference. Much love, y'all. Keep up the good fight. We'll see you next week. Check us out at filterfreeradio.com.
Filter Free Radio.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. So give me something to believe, 'cause I am living just to believe, and I need something more to keep on breathing for. So give me something to believe.
The revolution will be broadcast
Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Filter Free Radio.